Hi, Rachel. Welcome to We Know the Rules podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, Amy. I'm good, thank you. And thanks for having me today on the podcast. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. We met at the Asian Collective Leadership Conference and we got chatting. The theme was around sports. And so I asked you what sports that you played or involved in, and you told me ultimate frisbee. And at the time, out of completely like selfish purpose, I was like, oh, do you have a referee or umpire in ultimate frisbee? And your answer completely threw me, and I was just so fascinated. So tell us about ultimate frisbee, please.
Yeah, obviously, I play a sport called Ultimate Frisbee, and essentially, just a brief description of what that is. It's a non-contact sport where you are passing a disc between your teammates. And the way that I like to explain it is that it's a mix between netball and American football. So I like to describe it in that way because it's sort of similar to netball, because once you catch the disc, you have to set a pivot foot, and that is determined on whether you're right-handed or left-handed, and you can't move the disc once it's in your hands. And it's sort of like American football in the sense that you have a pitch with two end zones, and when you pass the disc between your teammates and you catch it in that end zone, you score a point there. And there's a couple of different surfaces that you can play Ultimate in. So there's grass, there's beach, and there's indoors. And I'd say outdoors is the most common one. It's played on grass, and that's 7-on-7. And then both beach and indoors is played 5-on-5. And I think the most unique aspect of the sport that you sort of mentioned already is that Ultimate is a self-officiating sport. And I think that's quite an interesting part of the conversation that we might have today. And it's essentially putting the onus of the understanding of the rules and applying those rules on the players that are playing on that current pitch.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating. So obviously this podcast was designed for female referees and umpires or officials. And this is such a completely different perspective because there's no such official in ultimate frisbee. So like you said, like all the players, you self-refereeing or self-officiating, and all players have to have a good understanding of the rules. So from my understanding, the rules is called the spirit of the game.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Would you like to tell us more about the
Yeah,
spirit of the game?
Of course, yep. So I guess essentially the rules of Ultimate Frisbee is managed by a rule book by an international governing body, and the main core element that underpins the rules is the spirit of the game. So I'd describe the spirit of the game a bit like sportsmanship, and it's really unique to Ultimate, and as I was saying, it applies the responsibility back to the players and making sure that they enforce the rules and everyone's playing in a fair manner. And essentially it's trusted that the players that are on the pitch don't break the rules at all. And it's just being on the pitch and talking with each other and making sure that you're resolving things in a respectful manner. And I think that is a really great way to sort of create an environment where there is true sportsmanship. So things like deliberately fouling or disrespectful conversations is something that is against the spirit of the game. And there's a couple of elements to the spirit of the game, and that is the scoring system that comes attached with the spirit of the game. So when you are finished with a match, you usually score your opponent on 5 different categories in the spirit. The first one being the rules, knowledge, and use. So it's looking at whether you're using consistent rules throughout the game. There's fouls and body contact, so just looking at whether the players are being safe and whether they're playing in a dangerous way or if there's any significant physical contact. There's also self-control and attitude, so just making sure that everyone is respectful to everyone, and that's whether to your own team, your own teammates, or your opponents as well, so how you approach that. And then there's fair-mindedness, so were the fouls being resolved fairly, were the different opinions that were offered to that discussion being acknowledged. And then finally there's communication, so it's just looking at how you've approached that conversation in a respectful manner and whether you're communicating that clearly. And across all those 5 categories, at the end of the match, they are scored between 0 to 4, so bad to excellent, and then that gets averaged. So at the end of a tournament when you play all your matches. Obviously, you have a finishing position of how well you played, but you also have a finishing position on the spirit as well. So it really does kind of add an extra interesting element to the game, I think. And as I said, I think it does create a really great environment for true sportsmanship.
That is so interesting. So every player evaluate each player in the opposing team. So not just the captain.
So it's a collective way of scoring. So I think when you're on the pitch, you obviously have different types of matchups. So each player has a different experience based on their individual matchup, but it's also their assessment on the entire team, if that's being consistent. So it's the team coming together at the end of the match and them all discussing those 5 categories. And if anyone has a significant reason as to why they think a certain category, so fouls and body contact, if they thought that it was a bit higher or if it was a bit lower, then we come to a collective agreement in terms of scoring that. So I think each player has a perspective based on their specific matchups, but you do come together as a team to score that point, the spirit of the game.
I see. Okay. So in terms of the scoring at the end of the game or the tournament, does it count towards the winning or losing? Or is it more purely on the score of the game that's the winning and losing? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is different. So as I was saying, the performance of the team has their leaderboard. That is separate in itself. So if you win a game, if you win the final, that will be the finishing position. The spirit scores is a completely separate category that is added on top of the tournament. So if you have the highest average of spirit scores at the end of the tournament, you win spirit, and in the high level of international tournaments, you do get medals for that as well. So you do get recognised for being playing in a good way.
Wow. Okay. That is really something different, isn't it? Because most of the sports will have someone, it's the arbitrator, just basically telling you that that's okay, that's not okay. But this is a collective decision, and also there's a lot of trust, right, between the teams as well, that you trust that your opponent will honor the spirit of the game.
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting concept. Like, for example, when something happens on the pitch, like I come from a background of playing lots of different team sports, and when I first started playing, you're looking around for someone to make a decision, but actually you have to make the decision yourself. So it's just kind of staying calm and just making sure that you can articulate the rules well enough. And I think, as you're saying, like, there is an element of knowing the rules well enough so that you can apply it as well. So there is a lot of different new factors that get introduced because you have to self-officiate the sport, as opposed to other traditional sports that you think of that have referees.
Yeah. So could you recall any incidents that's quite memorable? So it could be because it's a good kind of incident, or it could be something that you feel like that's a bit of negative kind of incident. Kind of put you on the spot here a little.
Yeah. So I can't really think, there isn't anything that comes to mind from my personal experience right now, but I guess some common incidents that do happen in the sport is that when a call happens, it is usually between 2 different players, and they stop to have a discussion and they both offer their opinion of how the call went. And there is an opportunity in that environment for anyone around that has observed what has happened to offer their opinion as well. And quite often it is one-sided in terms of it is quite clear a foul has gone a certain way. Sometimes it can be quite mixed and there's varying views. But I think at the end of the call, it's ultimately the 2 players that are involved that make that decision. And particularly in a situation where it is one-sided perspective, but the opposing team have decided to not take on the clear perspective of that one-sided call. So I think it's quite interesting because despite having all the opinions that are being added to the discussion, it is at the end of the day the two players, and that might be against the majority of perspectives that are being offered in that discussion.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that you mentioned that in some higher level of the tournament, there would be someone called the observer. So the observer is not a referee or an umpire. So could you tell us
No.
more about the role?
Yeah, of course. So I guess in international tournaments, particularly, I guess more European and kind of when you're playing country worlds, you get more introduction of what's known as a game advisor. So this is a non-playing officiating role. And they don't necessarily make the calls, but they help players with making a decision of the calls, and they help with timing as well, and they offer information on what they saw and help resolve the calls as quickly as possible. I think the important thing about the game advisors is that they are facilitators and they are there to provide a perspective if players ask for that. And as I was saying, players can take on the perspective of other people around them, and that includes game advisors, or they may not. So ultimately, even though the game advisor is there to kind of help a lot with facilitating, it is then still ultimately the player that makes the final call.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So communication skills is like essential, isn't it, in the game? Not only just physical fitness.
I think, yeah, the communication part of it, I personally find that quite hard in the game, just especially with running around and, I'm just, once I stop playing, I'm trying to catch my breath. It's sort of, I have to switch my brain to think about how I approach a call if it does happen. So yeah, that does add an interesting element to it too.
So how did you get into the sport?
Yeah, so I guess I grew up playing a lot of different sports. I was always really active and I liked playing team sports. And I guess my sister was the first person that introduced me to the sport of ultimate, but it wasn't until I started university in 2013 that I started playing the sport. And I guess I just really liked the team aspect of it and the community side of it. And I think specifically in the UK, a lot of players that start playing the sport get introduced at a university level, and I felt like when I first started playing, it felt like I was joining a sport where a lot of people were also playing it for the first time. So I really like that aspect of it. But yeah, I do think that the UK is doing a lot better in terms of introducing the sport at a younger age. There's a lot of outreach activities that they are doing and contributing to the community. But yeah, I guess that's essentially how I got into Frisbee. It was at university.
Wow. And I can see, like, because you mentioned about the outreach, and I can see that this is a sport that's really good for young people, right?
Yeah, I think it is because of the elements that I've just spoken about in terms of having the communications approaches and being able to handle conversations in a higher pressured situation. So I think it does help with developing soft skills, especially as you were saying, if that was introduced at an earlier stage, I think you get exposed to sort of those environments a bit early on.
Yeah. And when I was sort of doing a bit of research on yourself and the ultimate Frisbee, I saw that it was like for quite a while you captained a team, and then you won the European Club Championship in 2023, I believe.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So in terms of like the levels that I've played, so when I was at university, I did captain my team back there, and then I've had, as I've sort of played more of the sport, I had quite a lot of opportunities to play at quite a high level. So I've played for GB in the under-24 division, so that was in 2018, and then I also play for about 5 years for an elite mixed team in London. So they won nationals the last 3 years, and they also won the European Championships in 2023 and 2024. And yeah, they still perform at quite a high level. So in terms of my experience, it has ranged quite a lot over the years.
Yeah, that's amazing. So is it a mixed sport in terms of gender, or is it separate?
Yeah, so I think that's another interesting element of Ultimate, is that there's 3 different divisions that you play at. So there's obviously the men's and then women's, and then there's also the mixed division. So I'd say that the main division that I've played at is at a mixed level, and I think that again is quite different to a lot of different sports. You don't see a mixed division in a lot of the traditional sports, as mentioned before, and I think that was also one of the key things that I really liked about joining the sport as well, is that it creates quite a social environment for especially new players.
Yeah. So how is that for you? Just in terms of like, you have a lot of experience playing other sports, other team sports, that's completely separate, so you play with women and moving into a sport that you have a mixed group. Was it difficult for you, or was it easy transition?
So I think it's having the different divisions is obviously very different, but I think the biggest difference for me is just more around the gameplay. I think with a lot of the sports that you see today, for football, for example, whether it's men's or women's, it is a completely different type of sport when you watch it. I think with men's, it's a bit more physical, and with women's, it's a bit more technical. And when you get both of those and you add that into a mixed division, I think that it just creates a very dynamic mix of the both. So strategy is very different, and I think things like matchups really matter more as well. And I think like creating spaces on the pitch as well, and kind of placing specific genders in a way that they can dominate as well. So when I think about mixed ultimate, is just more about it being a completely different style of play. If I was to play in a single division, I have played a little bit of single division quite early on, so I've played 2 divisions, but whenever I play in each of those, they are always quite different.
Yeah, that's really interesting that the strategies would change, or tactics would change according to the mixture of gender or the single gender kind of games. That's so fascinating.
I think it's just different because of levels of physicality, or
Sure.
the range of skills then become a bit larger as well. So you just have to think about your strategy a bit differently.
Obviously, in terms of the gender, it's quite inclusive. How about overall inclusiveness? How is it in the sport?
In Ultimate, I think that inclusiveness is really good. I think that we do a really good job at creating that environment, and I think that is like a really key point that I've seen as opposed to some of the other sports. And I guess it's also sort of down to the sport having quite a small community as well. I think it's really easy to get to know everyone in the sport, because you see some like the same faces so often. So I think the community side of it is really good in Ultimate.
Do you think that the spirit of the game kind of help with that inclusion as well?
I think the spirit of the game does create an environment and does contribute to sort of like the inclusive community, because it creates an environment where people have to be open with each other, and you have direct conversations with players on and off the pitch, because that ultimately contributes to spirit of the game. And I think in other sports like football, for example, you sort of get onto a pitch and you play your own game, and you don't really interact as much with your opponents in that way. So I think that definitely does create an environment where it feels a bit more open, and in turn I think that does create a nicer community.
Yeah, and I think that the aspects of respect for each other, right, respect the players, that is really great, because you're just basically actively encouraging people to show respect, to show sportsmanship. And I guess that during the conversation of discussing about a call, you're more discussing about the incident rather than the person themselves. So it's not really that personal, I guess.
Yes, I think ultimately when a call happens, you're trying to resolve an issue with your opponent that is true to the rules, and anything that is outside of that is sort of unnecessary. So it is resolving something that is according to the rule book.
Mm, yeah. And how important it is for you to be in a sport or to be in an environment that's really inclusive and show a lot of diversity within?
I think that's fairly important. I think in our sport, there is quite a lot of diverse players. I think that is quite different to sort of the environment that I grew up in. So I think being able to kind of, as I've got older, be playing in a sport where there are a lot of diverse individuals, I think that has kind of helped me feel a bit more of the community as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I could imagine. So, would you mind telling us about of your cultural background, like your childhood growing up? Yeah, just kind of lead us into your world a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, of course, I'm happy to. So I was born and raised in the UK, and both my parents are from Hong Kong. And my granddad, first of all, from my dad's side, moved over to here in the 60s. And it wasn't until the 70s that my grandma, my dad, and my aunties and uncles also moved over here. On my mum's side, their entire family, or the majority of the family, moved over here in the 60s. That's where my parents met. So that's sort of my upbringing, my background.
Did you grow up in London or which part of the UK did you grow up in?
Yeah, so I grew up in a very small town in the south of England, so that's quite different to maybe someone of my background living in a city like London. I definitely do feel like I've had a very different upbringing in terms of representation because there
Mm.
wasn't really any representation when I was growing up. The only person that I had was my older sister, who's a couple of years older than me. And I guess kind of like leading that into sport, I guess, is earlier I mentioned that when I was younger, I played a lot of sport and I played a lot of football as well. I guess, first of all, I was a girl who really liked football and I was playing that sport with a lot of boys in my lunch break. Secondly, I was a minority group ethnically. So I feel like I've never really had representation in a sport that I love.
Mm. Yeah. And how was it for you? I couldn't imagine that it was easy.
It was, I guess, in terms of cultural background, I think it definitely was different. So I obviously was different, and I guess growing up, I did try to kind of fit in a way, and I wouldn't say that it was hiding or not being truthful, but I definitely growing up felt like I was concealing parts of my cultural identity. Just because, obviously, at home I'm mainly just having Chinese food or watching a Chinese program, and that is something that isn't necessarily the norm when I go into school. Um, so I think that has impacted my way of sort of breaking out the mold. Um, but I think as I've grown up, I've definitely realised that it is actually a strength in terms of having that experience and being different. Like being different is a very good thing.
Mhm. That's really powerful. Was there a turning point for you when you kind of like, oh, actually, this is great?
Yeah, I think obviously growing up, I didn't have that much of an environment where that there were that many non-white people around me. So I think the turning point was when I first started seeing more people in real life like me. So I guess that was started at university, and as I moved to London as well. Obviously, London's very diverse, so you do meet a lot of different people. And I think it was more starting to begin in my 20s in terms of just understanding that I have a very different upbringing to everyone else, and it's just recognizing that actually having these conversations with different people, what makes it so interesting when I'm having these conversations is how different we are and the different types of perspectives that we offer on things. And I just think those types of conversations have always sort of interested me. So I think that definitely is what shifted my view. And obviously going to events, obviously I met you at the ESEA event and meeting people that were quite similar to me or sort of within that community and hearing their experiences, and it's that shared understanding and just feeling like I wasn't the only one that was experiencing that thing. And it's just finding your community and having conversations with people that have or do go through the same thing.
Well, we're definitely not alone. And like you said, that sometimes we need to go into a space to understand that we're actually collectively, we're all going through a sort of similar experiences. And I think having that kind of support is quite important. It's quite essential, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's like having the support and having the representation as well. Like I remember you saying in your panel session about why not me when you were approached with your referee position. And yeah, if you can kind of tackle that in that situation, why can't I either? So I think it is sort of within the community, we're all experiencing our own things, but then it's also hearing other people speak about similar experiences, and that then inspires you to do certain things as well. And I think that is important because maybe sometimes you don't think about it in a certain way, but if someone has done it but in a different context, in a different way, why can't you apply that in your same situation?
Yeah, absolutely. From your own experience of recognizing that your difference is your strength, as well as being in ultimate frisbee, that is quite inclusive, and seeing other sports, so for example football, that you were really passionate about. So what can other sport do more to be more inclusive?
Yeah. Yeah, I do think it's quite different to other sports in that sense that it is a lot of self-management. And I think, yeah, as was mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of emphasis on the spirit of the game. And I think that gets introduced as you learn how to play Ultimate as well. So I think being a true sportsmanship is part of playing the game. And I guess that gets introduced really early on. And I guess with other sports like football and rugby, which I've played at before, and I watch a lot of that as well on TV, is that a lot of the plays are played so that referees can see a certain side of that, or that players often approach it in a way that they try to favour their own team, for example. And I think in Ultimate, because of the spirit of the game, that sort of element of it is removed from it. I think a lot of people that I interact with come from a background of some of these sports as well, and you do kind of see how they approach calls in terms of kind of discussing it in a way that sort of favours their team, for example. And I guess it's a way of managing around different types of people and in the game as well. So yeah, there is a lot of different skills that are attached to Ultimate that you don't see in other sports, and I think it's displaying all of those that I think is different.
Yeah. And that also kind of got me thinking in terms of supporters, fans. So for Ultimate Frisbee, I guess you have spectators, you have fans coming to watch the game.
Yep, so on the pitch in an outdoor setting, you have 7-on-7 players, and then you have the rest of the team that are surrounding the pitch. They are there to support you on the pitch, and then you have spectators. So for Ultimate, it's a relatively niche sport, so it's a growing sport. So you do, at the moment, get spectators that are usually family and friends. More of the international ones, that's when you get stadiums and more people kind of spectating. And I think that it does add an interesting element, because with the spirit of the game, in certain situations, you can ask for the perspective of people that have seen the call. And that isn't just limited to the players on the pitch or the game advisor, for example. It can be people providing a perspective on the sideline. So some of the people that aren't currently playing, but they can also be spectators. Whether someone is in or out of the pitch, if they have a very clear perspective, then they can raise their hand and say, we saw what happened and we think that is in or out. So I think that, again, does add an interesting element to the sport.
100%. I didn't know about that. It's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah,
Imagine a
I
football
also
match.
forgot about that. And I guess in the same way that football has VAR in more of the international level as well, in some of the more major tournaments, that you have photographers and you have people that are filming the game as well. So if there is a very contentious call that's happened, maybe again it's an in and out, and if there happens to be a photographer that has a very clear image, or if there is footage of that replay, the two players on the pitch can then ask for the photographer's perspective or look to the filming footage, or they can review it themselves, but only the two players that are involved in it have to both agree to reach out for an extra perspective.
Yeah. That is so cool. It just so much engagement just in terms of the whole game, like for the spectators, for just everybody involved. That's really, really cool. I was just trying to picture, like, imagine a football game and then the referee blow for a foul and then a fan like raise their hand and say, no, it's not a foul.
Yeah. And I guess it's that mindset again,
Yeah.
like with those sort of sports, is that you try to play a certain play in favor of your team, and I think that I guess that trickles down to fans as well. But in Ultimate, because there is such an emphasis on the spirit of the game, it's the spectators also to a level uphold that and try to make it as fair as you can, because that is fundamentally what is holding up because the rules of our sport.
Yeah. Yeah. And how are the fans in terms of, well, I'm just going to say it quite frankly. So, for example, football, there's a lot of racism and there's a lot of, just chanting, even on pitch or off pitch, online. There's a lot of abuse. What are the fans like for Ultimate Frisbee? I think you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but will you be able to tell us a bit more? Yeah.
I don't think there really is anything kind of like that. I think, as I said, like I feel like the community does quite a good job in being inclusive, being diverse, and it tries to represent kind of things in society like that. And I've not really had an issue with it, and I don't think that I've seen an issue with it really. So when it comes to that situation in other sports, like in football, when you have people that are shouting abuse in the fans area, if that happened in Ultimate, that's really frowned upon. Like, it's against the sportsmanship of the sport, really, and it sort of takes away the spirit of the game if that happens.
Yeah. I'm a new fan of Ultimate Frisbee. I think it's a game that everybody should play and should respect the spirit of the game, and everybody should study that as well. I think it's great.
Yeah, of course. Like, come check it out. It's great.
Yeah. I think it's great. So thank you so much for sharing a lot of your experience in sports in your community. Is there anything else that you feel that's really important and I haven't asked you, we haven't discussed?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of the sport, there are a couple of challenges that I think I face as a player and also as kind of a self-officiating sport. So I think the first thing that I can think of is confrontation. So as I mentioned, my granddad was the first person to move over to the UK in the 60s. And as you can imagine, he probably faced a lot of adversity during his time. And even with my parents as well, I've always been taught to sort of work hard and kind of pave a good career for myself and not offer too many opinions in terms of causing tension. And I think that has been the biggest challenge for me at the beginning when I was playing Ultimate, is the confrontation side of having to sort out calls, as I didn't really want to offer much of my opinion and I didn't really want to be wrong or cause any tension that was on the pitch. But I think I did learn that quite quickly that having my opinion isn't necessarily going to be the cause for tension, but it was more about the way that I approach it. And I still do get nervous about kind of having this confrontation side of things and having to voice my opinion on the pitch. So I think in these situations, I've learned to have these statements in my head so that I can kind of approach a call in a particular structured manner. And I think I always have to remember that ultimately the players on the pitch are trying to achieve the same end goal. They're trying to resolve the same call that you're having. And I think that is the main thing that I've had to learn, is the confrontation side of things, just based on my upbringing and how I approach communication at that time. The second part of it is the fitness side of things. I think I've mentioned this already, but I'm running around and I'm just focusing on catching my breath. And the last thing that I could think of is what has just happened about 10 seconds ago, and having to catch my breath and quickly think on the spot in terms of how I can uphold the rules and resolve a call. So that can be quite tiring.
Yeah, thank you. I think two great points. And just coming back to the first point, I really appreciate that you share that element, because so much of who we are was really rooted from our upbringing, isn't it? From our childhood, how our family, the environment mold us into who we are now. And that resonated with me so much, just in terms of like in our culture, just like, well, don't make waves, don't try
Yeah.
to like, get into conflicts, just kind of like have a big smile and just agree, and then just be really sort of mild and agreeable. And I have found it very difficult, being able to find my own voice and being able to speak up for myself. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that perhaps East Asian, especially women, have faced growing up or being in the sort of environment that we are the minority. So I'm really grateful that you brought up that. That's a really important point. And I think probably just a call to encourage a lot of other East Asian women to, all go play Ultimate Frisbee to learn that. But I mean, like, I also champion that in boxing as well. That's part of what I do, like using boxing to be able to, hold your own ground, find your own space and find your own voice. And I think we all have that inner strength, and then we just need something to bring it out for us. And how empowering is that once you find your own voice, right?
Yeah, I think so as well. I think, as I was saying, I think when I first started playing, learn a lot about the sport, and as well as learning about how to play, learning about how you apply those rules, and then all of these soft skills come attached to it. So yeah, I think it's been a learning curve for me, especially just breaking out of those usual behaviors, as you say, your upbringing and everything, and just tackling that in a way that is growing you as an individual.
Yeah, that's great. And in terms of the second point as well, I think a lot of sports kind of bring in that element, just that you make decisions under pressure. But I guess, like you say, Ultimate Frisbee, because that decision could be affecting the team score, affecting the goal. So you're under pressure, you're physically exhausted, but you need to keep mentally sharp to make decisions, to be able to get engaged in conversations. And that's a great training.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Just making sure that you're mentally sharp for that. And I think those sort of situations get quite enhanced, sort of the higher level that you play at, and also in games where it is a lot like the match is quite close in terms of you've got a very close match in your hands, and a call could make or break a certain point. I think sometimes you come across different individuals as well that sort of approach that differently, and it's just how you sometimes it can be quite different in terms of how you have that conversation, just depending on the situation. So I think that's interesting. There's a lot of different factors that could cause a call to go a certain way, and I think those are some of the elements. Just being able to approach the conversation when you've just been running around.
And the emotional element of it as well, right? Like what you said, it could be a call that make or break the game. So the emotions are all really high. And how do you manage that emotion and being able to talk and discuss with logic, with just being very practical and sensible? And that's very tough.
I think so. And I think you just have to take a bit of time. Like you do have to just take a breather and have that discussion. I don't know if I've mentioned before as well, but in certain fouls and situations that you have a discussion, there is a time limit that you have to have these discussions. So there's a certain period of time that you have to resolve the call in. And if you don't come to a resolution at the end of that, then you essentially called a contest. So you have a disagreement. So the disc gets taken back to before the foul happening or the situation happening.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? You have to have a time frame. Otherwise, then the game would last forever. Just ongoing, endless discussions.
And I think that can be quite difficult to uphold sometimes when a discussion goes on for too long because you don't have a timer on the pitch.
Yeah, such an interesting sport. And thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I thank you for having me today. Had a really interesting conversation. I think it's very, very nice to be able to share my background in the sport of ultimate.
Yeah, it's so nice having you. And, like I said at the beginning, when I first met you, I just thought it's so fascinating. And you talked about self-advocacy and stuff. And then you definitely show, like when we first met, I think during the panel discussion, you were asking questions, like really good questions, at how we sort of get involved and how do we promote more diversity and inclusion in different kind of environments. And yeah, I just thought that you were so thoughtful, and you're a living representation of like what you're trying to do. And I just think it's great. And I'm so glad that I met you and we had a conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's been really interesting just having a conversation, because obviously we both have like a background in sport, like you with your boxing refereeing. It's just a completely different world in terms of refereeing, and yeah, I'm happy to chat about my experience on that. So yeah, I think that's what's made it so interesting.
Yes, yeah, great. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you do, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.